Welcome back to Building Better Businesses in ABA with me, Jonathan Mueller. It's a weekly podcast about the forces reshaping our autism services field. Learn from successful entrepreneurs, payers, investors, and leaders in applied behavior analysis. Thank you, kind listener, for letting me into your world today. Now on to the show. My guest today is Jeff Beck. Jeff is a CEO and co-founder of Answers Now. Answers Now uses a comprehensive approach to ABA that combines cutting-edge technology and evidence-based strategies to help children reach their fullest potential. When not working on access to care, Jeff spends his time running around Richmond, Virginia with his wife and 3 children. Jeff, welcome to the pod, man.
How you doing? Good to see you.
It is great to see you. All right, let's talk about innovation in our field today. I'm pumped for this. And maybe just to start, tell me about your Answers Now journey. Like, what were the challenges that you saw in our field, and how does Answers Now solve for those challenges?
Sure. So I think, at the beginning, I want to caveat, right? I'm a licensed clinical social worker, not a BCBA. So, I've learned about the manding and the taxing, but I'm a little bit of a different ilk. But Answers Now came because I was running community-based programs at a huge nonprofit in Virginia. And next door was the autism school where they did ABA. And it's where I met my co-founder, Adam Dreyfus, who is an LBA BCBA. And he and I would stay after work talking about ways to try and serve just our populations in general, kids with autism, ADHD, anxiety, how to serve, Medicaid folks, how to get their families involved, parents involved, increase access. And we both got really passionate about the science of ABA and what he calls the squishiness of kind of CBT, DBT in my background, right? And so we felt like we could use technology to combine the best of both of those worlds by delivering care to as many folks as possible, anybody with an iPhone or an Android, by putting a BCBA on the other end with really strong training. So that was kind of the genesis. I think the hardest part in the early days was standardizing care, because every BCBA came in with kind of their own deal, right? How they like to do it, what they thought they could achieve, via mostly text at the time. So coming up with trainings and curriculums and ways to support the BCBAs was kind of the first thing we focused on. This is 4 or 5 years ago, and it's certainly something we continue to focus on today.
Well, I think this is powerful, right? It's amazing just to think how our world's changed in the last 3 years, and COVID, like, all of a sudden unlocked this opportunity to provide these services in maybe ways that didn't do it before. But what's interesting to me, Jeff, is that these challenges are not dissimilar to challenges that we might find in other parts of healthcare, right? So think about specialists, right? Nephrologists or whatever specialty serving rural communities. Are there analogs you've seen in the rest of the healthcare world that inform your Answers Now strategy?
Without a doubt. I mean, so 2017, 2018, I was a Talkspace therapist. So I was like, let me just see what this is kind of like. I'm curious if this can be meaningful. And it certainly wasn't for everybody. And working with a newly married couple as a talk therapist is certainly different than providing ABA virtually. But just the general concept of increased care via technology was really interesting to me. So I actually was a therapist 2017, 2018 on Talkspace just to see what it was like as a clinician. And I learned a lot through that process. And my last role before Answers Now was at HCA doing value-based care. So when we started Answers Now, this is obviously all pre-pandemic. I wish I could say I had a crystal ball and knew that we were all going to be sucked into this virtual world. But I felt that there was some level of value-based care concept that existed here with payers to reduce costs, to provide access to care for learners who did not need 30 hours of ABA a week. And in 2018, 2019, the prevailing response I got was, you cannot serve a kid with autism without seeing them in person. It is impossible. Like, you are wildly crazy. And then, like, roughly March of 2020, April 2020, like in that time frame, the payers were like, what do you do again? How does this work? And so, I mean, it was certainly a tailwind for us, and something that I think opened the eyes of the payer, because I think, unfortunately, in healthcare, we're very much beholden to who has the purse string, and in this world, it's the payer.
It is. Payers are critical stakeholders in the process. And one of the things I know when you and I first connected, gosh, it's probably almost 2 years ago now, that I was like so excited about was your pedigree as a licensed clinical social worker. And full disclosure, right, at Ascend Behavior Partners, one of my ABA services organization, we are all in on the family mental health and support model. And
Yep.
we see the power of it, right? We know that
Yep.
when one of our LCSWs gets involved during a crisis moment,
Yep.
our kiddos are 3 times more likely to achieve an intended graduation date than when they don't. So we're bought in. But tell me more about, as an LCSW by training, how has that
Yep.
informed your outlook on the ABA field and how you've built Answers Now services?
Yeah, I think it all goes into BCBA training, right? So when we bring a BCBA on board, they go through a pretty robust onboarding and training, and that you all call it person and environment, right? I call that just family involvement, roughly, right? Like, let's get the parent here and let's have them be a part of the session. We are billing 97156 almost 20% of the time. That's the parent training code, because it is something that we believe very strongly, and that is how, longitudinal change occurs. This is the person who spends 99.9% of the time with the kiddo, right? It's the parent. And so the only way that you're going to really, in my opinion, see long-lasting change is if you have a parent in the house that's kind of carrying the torch. I mean, I saw this as an in-home clinic. I would do 7, 8 hours of in-home therapy a week, right, with some of my more intense cases. And my most challenging ones were the ones where the environment was constantly shifting. Maybe it was weekends at dad's, weekdays at mom's, whatever it was. If that environment was constantly changing and what I was trying to accomplish as a clinician was not happening when I was gone, that's really hard, right? And so, how do we use technology to align parents, families, caregivers with what a clinician's trying to achieve? I'm not saying that's not something that ABA has done, but from a social worker perspective, that was something that we knew early on that we could really lean into. The holy grail is coordinated care, right? And you've got pediatricians and psychiatrists and speech pathologists, all of them kind of talking together. I think that's maybe the next iteration. Like, that's a really challenging proposition. Um, so let's just start with the family first.
Absolutely. I want to give our audience like a perspective on how LCSWs just think a little bit differently about our world. So, as an example, one way I see it is parents might go through divorce, right? Unfortunately, it's not uncommon. I think BCBAs are not necessarily trained with a set of tools and a toolkit to think about how do you counsel a parent, right? That's outside of scope of practice, if you will. Whereas, like, for an LCSW, that's part and parcel of like how we're
Yep.
helping. But what would be a specific example you see around how an LCSW might think a little bit differently about the world, and then how you've baked that in?
Yeah, I mean, I think the chasm is much smaller than it seems, right? So I think, like, in our training, where we would go there would be, how is the change in the parent's behavior due to the divorce changing the environment for the child, right? So what parent is happening in your environment? How are you reacting to things? How are you showing up each day? What are the things that you're doing that might be negatively impacting your child's behavior? So that's a kind of confluence of the LCSW ABA world, where we, like, the LCSW and me, I would bring that back to the child regardless, right? Like, I'm there to serve the child. I'm going to do parent training. If something, demonstrable is happening in the parents' lives, we can't ignore that. But I'm always going to gear it back towards, how are we serving the client that I'm here to serve together, as a parent clinician. And so it's going to be very similar, and we're just going to put it in the ABA terms, right, around environment and behaviors and consequences, and be able to support that parent in the ultimate goal of supporting their child.
I love that. In other words, there's way less daylight between the two disciplines
Totally.
than we would
Way
think,
less.
right?
Way
Yeah,
less. Yeah.
absolutely. Well, you tell me, what are the locations that you serve now, and like, what's the sweet spot of a typical client that you serve there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll go backwards. So sweet spot for us, our average learner is 10, right? So we're serving the kids who, about 50% of our learners have had ABA before, and 50% haven't. 90% of them are in public education, or not in private day school, right? They're in general top school. We're doing about 4 hours of ABA a week on average. We've got some learners who are doing 7, 8. We've got some learners who are doing 2, 3. Those are typically older, 13, 16, 19, 22, right? They're only going to do a couple of hours a week. We have a few younger learners, 2, 3, 4, 5, where that's going to be primarily parent training, right? It's going to be very parent led. Now, some of the 4, 5, 6 year olds, they can do it on their own, but for the most part, that's going to be parent led. So the sweet spot, I would say, is the 8 to 12 year old doing 4 or 5 hours a week. So that's 3 to 4 with the learner, 1 to 2 with the parent. or caregiver. But it kind of works. We jokingly call the 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old the better than nothing plan, right? It's like you're on a wait list, you've got 6, 9 months. There is almost no harm in getting a BCBA in there, coming up with a treatment plan and getting a little bit of parent training rolling while they wait on the wait list. So that's yeah, our sweet spot is probably the 8 to 12-year-old. We accept all major payers across Virginia, Georgia, New Mexico, and Texas, Medicaid commercial. And we actually just started a partnership with Magellan, California. And you and I were talking about this really quickly. I was at the Value Conference, the Behavioral Health Business Value Conference a few weeks ago. And the CEO of Magellan was talking about a population of kiddos. They just couldn't get served. It was about 50% Spanish speaking, really underserved area. And I was like, we can do it. We can get them started tomorrow. And I will say within a week, we had close to 2 dozen of those families out of about 60, I want to say they sent over. About 2 dozen already single case agreements submitted and getting assessments started. I would say a handful of them already found in-home or clinic-based care, and the other 30 or so we're still working on getting in touch with. So Magellan's been a great partner in that. They're reaching out to folks for us and updating phone numbers, right? If we get a wrong phone number, it's been disconnected, whatever it is, because that's not a crazy concept in the world that we live in. So it's been really, really cool. But at the end of the day, this is what really excites me, to be able to get access to care to folks who otherwise wouldn't have had it.
Well, congratulations on that Magellan partnership. And I want to come back to something you said, Jeff, on or around sort of the better than nothing plan, which you say a little bit facetiously, but it is really important. And I'm going to say something kind of controversial, because in my 11 plus years in the field, there have been times where I've talked to folks who it's like, hey, you have to have the perfect, pristine ABA program
Sure.
or nothing. And I don't know. I just can't. I don't buy that. Right. I mean, to be clear, I mean, your BCBAs are providing both the 97153, some direct treatment, right? In addition to providing parent training, the 97156. So you're doing both models. But coming back to your point around engaging parents and helping them be more successful in working with their kiddos' behaviors and skills acquisition, that sure as heck feels like it's better than nothing, doesn't it?
I would tend to agree. I mean, maybe you're a little more fashion forward. I mean, like, you got the podcast, you're in the industry, right? I think I was afforded the luxury of a little bit of incompetence as an LCSW. It's like, why wouldn't we do this? ABA, the science is incredible. Look at the outcomes. It's algorithmic. It's black and white. It works. Why wouldn't we at least get some of that into a learner's life while they wait? Because that is the underbelly of ABA right now, are these wait lists and the difficulty of staffing RBTs and great RBTs, and that's where the challenge is. So why don't we use these incredibly brilliant BCBAs to bridge that gap while these families wait? So it might have been a little bit of ignorance on my part as an LCSW, but it's worked wonders. I mean, we had a parent survey, we sent it out a couple months ago. I think we got about 25 responses, and it was closed-ended questions, and then provide more information if you'd like, right? So it would be something like, are you less likely to use urgent or emergent services because of the access to your institutional BCBA? Was, for example, one of the questions. And 75% said yes, which is a pretty incredible response. But then we said, if you want to share more, feel free, right? And so parents would leave these qualitative answers to our quantitative questions, and they are life-changing. To see the amount of folks who were a little skeptical, right? They're like, I wasn't sure, but I'm desperate, right? My pediatrician said we need ABA. We called the 3 providers. My kid's 9. They're in 2nd grade, and all of the providers either have a year-long wait list or they need 15 plus hours up front, and we don't have that. I feel like a bad parent. I found this, figured it was worth a shot, and holy smokes, XYZ. That's why we continue to do what we do, to see those outcomes. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
I'm glad to hear that and the feedback from parents. Look, I think this is something that ABA providers just need to at least open up the periscope a little bit to open up the aperture, because there are payers right now. I mean, TRICARE for the last few years has been doing research on parent only models, right? Payers are trying to solve for, number one, rural and other underserved populations, right? That they have a responsibility for. And number two, payers recognize how expensive this is, and they're going to do what they do best, which is focus on utilization. So, doesn't it feel important that ABA providers in general understand and start to figure out, sure, maybe the model isn't perfect in certain kinds of circumstances, but how to incrementally keep improving on this?
Yeah. Well, I think to your point, the arc of the timeline of COVID plays a pretty big role here, in my opinion, because in February of 2020, and I'm making these numbers up, but just gut feel, 80% of BCBAs would have said that model doesn't work, right? And then a number of those BCBAs were thrust into Zoom face-to-face sessions by their agencies because they needed to bill something, right? So the agencies got rid of all the RBTs. There was no in-person because of COVID, and any billable hour that was being delivered was from a BCBA literally on Zoom with a family, right? And so BCBA is roughly 6 months, 9 months until we started to get some vaccinations in and consent signed. RBT started going back out into the homes, or clinics started to reopen. But during those 6 to 9 months, that 80% of BCBAs who didn't think it could happen, anybody who delivered face-to-face care saw that it can happen and it can work and it can be really meaningful depending on the learner, right? Like, we're not going to be able to serve the super aggressive kids. We don't want a 3.5-year-old, right? We want them in a clinic. We want an agency to work with them. That's where they're going to be able to learn quicker. But again, better than nothing is kind of our internal tagline for that learner. So the population of BCBAs who now think that does work has grown, I would say, at least to 50% because they did it and they saw it, right? And so then the door started to open back up, and the owners, and I don't want to paint them as this villain, they wanted to get their margins back. And so a BCBA was then voluntold, you're not going to do Zoom 4 hours a week anymore. You're going to send that RBT into the home for 30 hours a week. And the RBT's going to be, but Ginny's doing great with 4 hours. And they're going to say, I don't care. And the RBT is going back. And so that friction point, that arc of COVID from 2020 to 2021, I think has really opened the eyes of, in our experience, a lot of BCBAs who come to us and say, hey, this really worked for me in Zoom. And I felt like I have been thinking about if I could take TeachTown and these PDFs that I've created and this PowerPoint, and if I could put it on, I could have a really meaningful virtual session. And we're like, welcome home, you know? And so the number of BCBAs who are kind of thinking that way has certainly increased pretty drastically since pre-COVID.
It would seem like there's another use case here. And I like in ABA sometimes, like it's the Cadillac. It is clear. You know how passionate I am about the power of our science and the work we do. And you clearly are as well.
Totally.
And let's face it, it's really hard. It can be really hard. If you're providing a home program, your home becomes a therapy center, right? 38, 40 hours a week. Or you got a 2-year-old get diagnosed, you got to drop them off for 40 hours at clinic, whatever. Like this is like the Cadillac, right? And my question is like, is there the smart car option out there that for parents that, you know what, it's just not going to work in their life and their lifestyle? How do we continue to iterate and make that smart car, call it like a parent-led parent training model, work? I mean, is that an analog? I don't mean to be like,
no, I think it is. I mean, I think it is. I think it is. It's not as time intensive. Like that's just kind of the best way to put it. What we're doing, I do think there are learners that in a vacuum, if you could take a 9-year-old and you could give them, and this might be controversial, you could give them 30 hours of clinic based, or you give them 4 hours of BCBA led. I do think we can hit the same outcome for a specific learner, right? Because we've got parents telling us that their kid is excited about therapy and ABA therapy for the first time. And they've gone through a host of providers, and it's the 9, 10, 11-year-old, right, who they're the one troubleshooting if they can't hear, right? They're not grabbing mom or dad. They're tech savvy. They're scheduling on their own schedule. They get to own their session. It's predictable for them. It's not some stranger coming in, and there's no turnover, right? Our clinician retention rate at 1 year is over 85%. So like our family knows their clinician is their clinician. And so that's really meaningful for these kids to have that predictability. I think that is what allows us to hit really incredible outcomes at a fraction of the time from a dosage perspective.
Well, I can see listeners now probably thinking, well, I mean, where's the outcomes data and other things on that? And I'm sure this is early stage, right? And I would ask, where's the outcomes data in the rest of our freaking field, right? These are the challenging conversations we need to be having now as a field if we want to get out ahead of, for example, payers who are going to force lower utilization and higher, like requires more audits, everything else back on us. We've got to do our job properly as a field to push back on that. Well, let me pivot a little bit. I'm a huge fan, Jeff, of this book called The Cold Start Problem, How to Start and Scale Networks. The author is Andrew Chen. And in fact, I think he worked at Uber. But it's really funny. He talks about like the pinpointing the importance of focusing on the hard side of network building. And they even tell this story. This is kind of cool, dude. When Tinder got started, I've never used Tinder. I'm Gen X. I'm way too old and bald, et cetera. But when Tinder got started, I think it got started at UCLA, and they're trying to figure out how to increase adoption. And there was some party somewhere, and the admission requirement to the party is you got to sign up for Tinder, right? This is when Tinder didn't just like barely exist. Minimum viable product is an app. And guess what? They were able to build the entirety of their network around getting to sign up and go in. And I think as the story is told in the book, it's like the next day you talk to a whole bunch of people at a party, but you don't know who they were. You didn't get contact info. Now you got contact info. You can see this. Anyway, the rest is history, and Tinder took off. But the point is, like, it's really hard to build a certain side of your network. And that's where a lot of time has to be invested. So when it comes to Answers Now, what do you view as the hard side of Answers Now's network? Is it finding clients? Is it BCBAs and other providers, insurance companies, something else?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it changes. I know it's a bit of a cop out from an answer perspective. I think it changes. We have certainly felt the snowball on the BCBA side. We have started to see our name pop up in Facebook groups and in conversations in a positive light, which is we have worked really hard to do. We spend a lot of time making sure our BCBAs feel taken care of, and that is on purpose. We think there is a real waterfall effect to if you just take care of the BCBA and train them and give them free CEUs and give them an opportunity to share. I mean, the power, we have a Slack group of over 100 BCBAs. So the power of, hey, I've never worked with a 12-year-old who is on the spectrum and just told their parents they battle with anorexia. Has anybody had that before? And to have 2, 3, 4 BCBAs all put their hands up and be like, I can share this with you, happy to DM you, whatever it is. It cultivates that network. And so I think in the early days, it was certainly the BCBA side. I think that has changed a bit. I think from some of the kind of aforementioned COVID tailwinds, but also the size of the network. It just starts to roll downhill as it sounds like Tinder did. And then from the client side, I think what we say to our referral sources primarily lands, right? You want to be able to refer your kiddos to a place that's going to take care of them, send you the treatment plan, and not turn over. You just don't want that call in 6 weeks from that parent or that caregiver saying, why did you send me to XYZ? I'm on my third clinician. Like, what in the world? They want to just know that the kid that they care for is taken care of when they leave their doors. And so that is at the end of the day what we work very hard to do. And I am not ignorant to the fact that we were doing something very different in a field that's been doing the same thing for 40 to 50 years, and I don't even have the credentials. Like, I'm very aware, maybe too much, of how much of a bit of an outsider I may come across as, right? I'm grateful that my co-founder is an LBA, Columbia grad, BCBA through and through, but I'm still doing a lot of these podcasts. And if it, he does the Mary Barbera stuff, right? And I do the fun ones with you. But at the end of the day, I just think as long as we take care of the BCBs, that will continue to grow. As long as we take care of the referral sources, that will continue to grow. And then I think the payers, at the end of the day, they want their outcomes. They want to spend less money. And so those are two things that we're trying to provide to them, a way to spend less money and awesome outcomes. So that's, like you said, outcomes we're getting. Like, we personally have some really legitimate outcomes that we're very proud of. We're working on a white paper right now that we're excited to publish by the end of the year. Because I didn't understand the concept that, well, all these kids are so very different, you can't really aggregate outcomes. And to a degree, totally get that. But there are also my qualitative outcomes, right? Parent happiness, utilization, words, right? There are things that you can start to aggregate, and that's what we're also working on for us and for our payers.
Well, the grandfather of strategy, Michael Porter, who I believe was a Harvard Business School professor, he has like the Porter's 5 forces and frameworks to think about how an organization operates in its environment. And 2 components of the framework that I found fascinating are the idea of competition versus substitutes. So what's an example of that? Think about a car company, right? Who maybe has, Toyota and Subaru are competitors. But as you think about it from the consumer perspective, right? Yes, you could be deciding between wanting to buy a Subaru versus a Toyota, or a substitute could be that you're going to take light rail to work every day or to get around. So I don't know, as you're describing about Answers Now, do you think of your services as a sort of a substitute from the rest of ABA? Is it more like in line with ABA? How would you think about that?
I see it as a graduation. So I'm trying to come up with the analogy really quickly. but it's the kiddo who gets in-home or clinic-based from ages 3 to 6. And then in second grade, they start to backslide a bit and they had a good experience with ABA, but they don't want 30 hours. Then you and I are like, I'm very passionate about the science of ABA and very amazed at what it can do. And so it doesn't make sense for that 9-year-old to go back into a clinic for 30 hours a week, nor does it make sense for the clinic to try and rip that kid out of school, right? So it's more, in my mind, it's more of a graduation. It's a different service. It's like a plane. I don't know. I'm trying to think of something like it's not, we're not in the car category. And I think part of it is if you look at the diagnostic rates, right? The explosion was about 5, 6 years ago. So those kids were 3, now they're 9. And there just isn't a whole lot out there for that 9-year-old. And that's kind of where we come into play. So that maybe we're an Uber for a person who owns a Subaru if they're out of town, right? Like we're the better than nothing plan. We'll get you around. It's a little more expensive than you want it to be. It might smell funky or whatever. You get to go home to your Subaru at some point in time when you get off the wait list. I don't see it as competitive. I just see it as more options for a family who's lacking them.
Oh, I love it. You are brilliant, sir. Way to take that analogy and run with it. And by the way, I channeled the Peter Thiel term, like competition is for losers, dude, especially when it comes to serving kiddos with autism. And to your point around like diagnostic rates, at the time of this recording, it's late March, right? CDC just came out with
The
its
new one just
updated,
came out.
right?
Yeah.
1 in 36, right? So
Yeah,
look,
the 30s. Yeah,
there are more and more and more kiddos that need to be served, and we've got to
that's
continue
right.
to innovate to figure that out. Hey, can I ask you though about your business partner,
Yeah.
who's a licensed behavior analyst? Tell me about kind of some of the conversations that y'all have. Do you butt heads right on clinical stuff, or is it like? Tell me about your partnership.
I mean, I think the amazing thing was that we just kind of clicked. We both saw the space of a family that could be served using technology. And I think that was what was really exciting to the two of us is that we obviously have very different backgrounds and different education and different thoughts on behavior change. But he immediately, Jonathan, to your point about how some BCBAs want their ABA to be pristine and they don't like to think outside of the box, he immediately wanted to think outside of the box. He was like, 1 minute of ABA is better than 0 minutes of ABA for any kid, right? And so having that fundamentally drove us to what if we did this? What if we did that? What if we built a sticker chart in the platform? What if we did the carbon card sort in the platform? Or what if it was just for adults? Or what if it was just for 2-year-olds? Like what if we did, eye tracking and affect tracking and some things we've decided to prioritize and some things we've decided to deprioritize. But I think fundamentally, we both agreed that a little bit of ABA is always better than no ABA. And that's been our true north ever since.
Wow. So tell me, I mean, you all been working together for what, a few years now.
2016. So we are certainly not snake oil salesmen. Yeah, we've
Right.
been around for a little while. Yeah.
Like 7 years and counting. Tell me, is there a specific strategy that you all use to really make sure your partnership is as effective as it can be for your mission, your team, and your kiddos?
Man, that's a good question. He's the ABA true north, right? So this probably isn't surprising. I'm the excitable, some strategy driven entrepreneur, right? He's the BCBA. And so, what do you think about this? I don't think, and so I weight his opinion far heavier than any other BCBA that I know, just because I know his experience and his lived experience, and I have never seen anybody practice with a child the way that he can. I think there's a story that I tell. The nonprofit we both worked at was this huge campus, and I was walking across the campus, and there's this big playground, and there's a kid out there, 6, 7, 8, having a physical upset with 2, 3 techs with the pads. Everyone's seen it, right? And they just can't calm him down. And Adam, I mean, I swear, looked like a Jedi Knight. Just kind of slowly walked out of the school and knelt over and like slowly touched the kid's shoulder and looked away and looked back at him and took 2 steps back and just touched him again. And literally 30 to 45 seconds later, the two of them were just kind of locked, arm in arm, calmly walking back into the school. And I was like, holy smokes, right? And so I went to him. I was like, "What was that?" He's like, "That's ABA." And ever since then, I've just been hooked on how do we get that into more families' lives. And so anything about anything when it comes to ABA, he's my go-to guy.
Amen, brother. I call ABA the force all the time because you're
Yeah,
literally
I
changing
mean,
behavior without reshaping the environment. It's
I
unbelievable.
was just standing there. I mean, I had been spit on and cursed at and TV thrown on my foot. I've done it all in the in-home environment, right? And I just watched that happen, and I was just blown away. And so I haven't turned back since.
Wow. So, Jeff, I know in any entrepreneurial endeavor, and certainly in building and growing an ABA organization dedicated to quality, as you and Adam have, not everything is roses, right? What are some of the major
Yeah.
challenges you faced?
I think scheduling. I mean, just right out of the gate. This is not a question I was prepared to answer. My knee-jerk response is just scheduling. It's just getting our two-sided marketplace on the same page at the same time to be able to perform that behavior change at scale. That becomes really hard. When we're serving hundreds of families, doing thousands of hours of therapy a month, we're doing everything we can to streamline that process. So scheduling, I would say, is right now the thorniest. Another one, a plug for you, I would say, is revenue cycle management. I didn't get into this because I love to track billables or AR, right? And so I don't think many clinicians do. Fortunately, we've hired people way smarter than I am at this kind of stuff to ensure we actually get paid by the payers, but it's still really hard, right? It's still something you've got to keep your eye on at all times and wait on hold and call back and call back and call back. Yeah, that's another one. I think the paperwork collection, whether it's diagnostic paperwork or the right insurance paperwork, all the kind of red tapey stuff that anyone who's working in or on a business in the field, they're all experiencing the same kind of stuff.
Well said. Um, well, I'm going to pivot again here because you and I, again, as the time of recording, it's opening day for the baseball season. You and I share a mutual passion for baseball. You played in college, I think. I think you still have, like me. I've always got my bat and my glove and a ball in the back of my car so that I can have a catch at any time. Dude, what's the biggest similarity between like baseball and our ABA field, man?
Biggest similarity between baseball, I think they're both innovating at a rapid pace. Baseball, for the first time ever, has a pitch clock. It's 15 seconds. That's brand new. They have banned the shift, which is a huge rule. So these are some sweeping changes that have happened in the nation's pastime that are taking effect for the first time today. Uh, and I think the same thing goes for the field of ABA. I was at that conference, and one of the CEOs, the CEO of Cortico, was talking about their approach to value-based care, and it's innovative and it's really awesome. I'm rooting for them to continue to do what they're doing. I just don't. I might continue to be missing the ball here, but I just don't see it as competition. Like the more people working on the right things and focusing on outcomes for this population, I think it's the diagnosis rate continues to go up. I think the pie will continue to grow as long as we all continue to focus on outcomes. I know that sounds, it's not hyperbole. Like I just think make the world better for the kiddos you're serving. So yeah, I think that off the cuff, I would say they're both innovating.
I love it. As a longtime baseball fan, I can talk out of both sides of my mouth on something like a pitch clock, right? Like, we gotta shorten the game, right, and gotta make it more approachable for the next generations that have 9 second attention spans. But then there's another part of me that says, dude, this is not called a sport. This is called our national pastime. It's played in a
Yeah.
park, not in a stadium.
Mm-hmm.
It's played in a ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't know how I feel entirely about the pitch clock. But the other thing I'll throw out there, tell me your thoughts on this. Look, baseball is so much like this one to what pitcher and the batter, right? And yet, and same as ABA, it's like a clinician and the kiddo. And yet in baseball, you got this entire team behind you that you need to be successful, right? That you got to rely on. Same thing, right? There's this entire team behind a clinician that you got to rely on to be successful to serve a
Yeah.
kiddo. So I think, I mean, I could go on forever about that, but I think there are more similarities than people
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
think.
There's a lot of strategy involved, and the environment dictates what you're going to do. And yeah, I think you're spot on there.
Well, Jeff, what's one thing every ABA business owner should start doing and one thing they should stop doing?
Mm, one thing they should start doing. Oh man. If they're not already, I would say track outcomes that you can aggregate across your population. It's probably not a shocking answer. Stop doing um, overprescribing. Not every kid should get 30 hours a week if they just because they can. It's easy for me to say, but that's one person's perspective.
Oh man, this is not a cookie cutter science, right?
It's
It is
not a cookie
highly
cutter.
individualized. I absolutely agree. And the idea of tracking outcomes, even with all the scuttlebutt about disagreements around it, something you said earlier is really important. Start doing norm referenced assessments that are easy and are going to give you some insights into, for example, the quality of your relationship with the families, and whether it's a parent satisfaction score or an NPS, net promoter score, or like a parenting stress index, right? Are we actually helping to make parents' lives, are we helping to reduce their stress levels over time? Like these are all things that can be done without having to build coalitions around outcomes and whatnot.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Well, Jeff, where can people find you online?
Yeah. So Jeff Beck 11 backslash Jeff Beck 11 for LinkedIn, and then our website is getanswersnow.com. I love the field. You've had some of my investors, mentors, friends on your podcast. So anybody listening, feel free to just contact me directly if you have a thought, if you disagree, agree, question. It's just Jeff at getanswersnow.com.
I love it. And you can always drop a link in the show notes. We are on YouTube recording video. So come check us out and yeah, let us know what you think about this conversation. So, Jeff, are you ready for the hot take rapid fire questions,
Oh
dude?
yeah, yeah. Let's do it. Let's do it.
All right, you're on your deathbed. What's the one thing you want to be remembered for?
I know this is very fortune cookie-ish of an answer, but just that he lived life to the fullest. Like that's just, we've got a larger family than we used to. We've got twin 1.5-year-olds and a 4.5-year-old, and we're taking them all to Barcelona in a couple months. And that is going to be a time, right? It's going to be a time in an airport. It's going to be a time on a plane. I mean, there are going to be plenty of tears and plenty of deep breaths, but we're going to do it because we want to try and do everything we can with these kids and with ourselves. And so that's my long-winded answer of just squeezing as much as you can out of life.
I love it, Jeff. I had a buddy once tell me, like, suck the marrow out of the bone of life. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, all right. That's exactly what I
I'm
just
not as
heard.
intense as your Tony Robbins friend,
Yeah,
but it's maybe minor league version of that. Yeah.
I love it, dude. Hey, what's your most important self-care practice?
Exercise every day.
What kind?
Even if it's, yeah, I mean, so it depends. If I can carve out 45 minutes, I'll do like an intense hit workout or head over to the gym and lift weights. If I've got 20 minutes and a baby, I mean, he's going to be in my arms and we're going to be doing squats and lunges and I'm going to be doing burpees over him and we're just going to go until we sweat and then we're going to stop. So those are the two ends of the spectrum. I'd say if I can carve out an hour, I'd love to just, listen to music and lift weights. If it's I've got 19 minutes before the morning shower with a kid, and then that's what we're gonna do.
Oh, I love it, dude. That's like the reverse Murphy's law of like time and exercise. You just make it happen whatever
We're
time
just
you
making
have.
it happen,
Right?
and
Do,
whatever we got is what we're gonna do.
do you still play baseball or softball?
I don't. I retired, hung up the cleats basically when I had my first kid, the softball cleats. But I have been attending my 4.5-year-old's t-ball practices the last couple of days, so he just got started. So we'll see.
Yeah, buddy. I'm a coach on my, or the assistant coach on my 12-year-old's team, but I still play May to October. We have 2 different seasons of my
Nice.
co-ed, my old man co-ed softball. And I'll tell you what, I so look forward to those days.
Yeah, when my littles get bigger, I mean, I'll pick it back up. I loved it. I will say though, softball was incredibly frustrating because when you'd strike out on like a two seam 92-mile-an-hour fastball, you're like, that guy's awesome. Wow, he's awesome, right? That was a great pitch. But then when you like foul tip and strike out in softball, it's like pretty degrading. So I was not mentally prepared for the self-loathing because there's no hat tip to the pitcher in softball. Like that's not. It's just that's a me problem at that point.
Oh my God, you're hysterical, dude. Oh man. You have a favorite song or music genre?
Ooh, classic rock. This is a Woodstock poster. My dad was 15, and my grandfather chased him down on the highway and was like, "You're not going to Woodstock. Get back in the car." So I've got the ticket. I've got if you can see it, that's the ticket. Did not get used at Woodstock. And then I grew up in classic rock. So my dad was a classic rock morning show host for 20 years, and my first concert was Cheap Trick, and I've always loved classic rock.
No way. Yeah,
Yeah.
Surrender, dude. Like one of my favorite classic rock songs of all time. I love that poster for our listeners. 3 days of peace and music. Dude, does your dad have PTSD being that close to Woodstock and yet not
It
attending?
was not a happy story. He was like, I get it. I was 15. Probably shouldn't have been at Woodstock in retrospect. Yeah. So that's Rumors. I don't know if you can see. Whoop. Uh, that's the Rumors album, which is like one of the top, in my mind, rock albums of all time. Big fan of Fleetwood Mac.
Never Going Back Again. Favorite Fleetwood Mac song, dude. So like,
Yeah,
oh,
there's a lot of good ones.
mellifluous. What's one thing you tell your 18-year-old self?
The dots will connect. There's a Jobs quote out there, something like that. But I remember thinking, why am I doing this? Especially, I was working 2 jobs, going through licensure for my LCSW, and I was questioning, do I even want to be a therapist? And um, I'm glad I went through it and got through it, because that lived experience leads to the next lived experience. And so I think that's just keep going. The dots will eventually connect.
The dots will connect. Beautifully said. All right, you can only wear one style of footwear. What would it be?
Tennis shoes. Yeah, that's an easy one, right? Is there another choice? Crocs, maybe? I guess they're in.
Maybe Crocs. I mean, I hear Birkenstocks are like back in again. I don't know. I was the 90s in high school and college, and Birks were all the rage. But I mean, tennies,
That's
you
true.
can't go wrong, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, hey, Jeff, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, man, for sharing your wisdom and telling us about Answers Now.
No, I enjoyed it. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, kind listener. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode, can you do me a favor? Give me a rating on your favorite podcast channel. It helps more values-aligned people like you find the pod. Till next time, peace.
Did you hear about the guy whose whole left side got cut off? He's all right now.